The first thing I remember that day wasn't the smell of old paper or the ticking clock on the wall. It was his laugh, that sharp, smug laugh that cuts through a room and makes everyone else stare. We were sitting in the lawyer's office, polished wood, blinds half closed, sunlight cutting thin across the table. Mr. Harrison, the estate lawyer, had this careful voice, like he'd practiced bad news before. He cleared his throat. As stated in Walter Miller's last will and testament, and just like that, my father's life was reduced to paragraphs and commas. Ethan leaned back, already smiling. His suit was custom, navy, expensive, the kind that says, "I won the game before it even started." Then came the line, "To my son Ethan Miller, I leave Miller Engineering and all associated assets." He smirked, like the words had been written by God himself. Then Mr. Harrison continued, "To my daughter, Grace Miller," he hesitated, like even he didn't want to say it. "I leave the family residence at 12 Cedar Lane." Silence. You could hear the air conditioner hum, and then the laugh. That same sharp, careless laugh that made my stomach twist. He actually clapped, once. "The old house? You've got to be kidding me." He turned to me, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Guess Dad thought you'd make a great handyman, huh? Hope you enjoy fixing leaks while I run the empire." No one said a word. Even the lawyer avoided eye contact. I just sat there, hands tight on my knees. Part of me wanted to yell, to remind him that empire he was bragging about was built by the same calloused hands that fixed our sink, changed his tires, patched our roof. But I didn't, because that's what I've always done. Stay quiet, let him perform. He leaned closer, whispering, "Don't look so sad, sis. Some people just aren't meant for big things." I could smell his cologne, too strong, like money trying to hide sweat. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I just felt done. I looked straight ahead, my voice calm, almost too calm. "You're right, Ethan. Some people aren't meant for big things. Some are meant for things that last." His smile flickered. Just a second, but I saw it. That crack. He didn't know it, but that moment, that was the beginning of his fall. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat again, fumbling papers, pretending not to notice. Outside, a car honked. Inside, everything froze. And all I could hear was that laugh, the one that would echo in my head. For months. You know that laugh. The one that says you'll never be enough. If your own family has ever talked down to you, hit like, subscribe, and stay with me. I'm not here to beg for sympathy. I'm here with receipts. I won't scream. I'll show you what happened, step by step, the way it really went down. If you've ever felt like the outsider at your own table, drop the word receipts in the comments so I know I'm not alone. And tell me this, what would you do if the person who laughed the loudest was the one holding everything you were supposed to inherit? Stick around. 10 minutes from now, the laugh that tried to shrink me is going to sound very small, because sometimes survival looks quiet. Sometimes the truth doesn't shout, it signs its name in ink. All right, let's keep going. I'm Grace Miller, 34, structural engineer, Portland, Oregon. I fix things other people say to tear down. It's a habit, also a survival skill. Ethan is my older brother, 3 years, MBA, perfect teeth, louder than any room he walks into. He wears success like a cologne. Too much, so you can't miss it. He calls himself Vision. He calls me practical. That's family code for you stay small while I take the stage. Our father was Walter Miller, Navy vet turned shop floor genius. He built Miller Engineering with grease on his hands and blueprints rolled in rubber bands. He believed in torque, angles, and showing up before dawn. He didn't give big speeches. He gave you a wrench and watched what you did with it. When I was 12, he let me hold the flashlight. By 16, I was holding the socket set. Ethan held microphones. Mrs. Porter is the estate lawyer, the kind of woman who can fold grief and paperwork into the same sentence. Neutral face, careful words. The office smells like coffee and old folders. The blinds throw little jail bar shadows across the table. You sit there long enough, you start counting them. I did. Mr. Alvarez lives 2 doors down from the old house on Cedar Lane. He's retired now, but he used to help Dad machine custom parts when orders piled up. He walks slow, listens fast. He remembers things people forget. Serial numbers, winter storms, who actually showed up on moving day. He's not family, but he's the only one who ever looked at me like I belonged in that shop. My life before the will? Rent-controlled apartment near the Max line. Steel-toed boots in the trunk. A rotating stack of site plans on the passenger seat. I don't post wins. I submit drawings. I don't network. I return calls. Quiet isn't weakness. Quiet gets beams to hold and roofs to stay. That's my language, steel, level, plumb. In our house, status was volume. The louder story, won. Ethan learned that early. So did Mom before she got sick. Dad kept his head down and his hands busy. I learned to listen for the things not said. The pause before a promise. The laugh that hides a flinch. The way a door closes when someone thinks, you're not coming back. So yes, Ethan walked out of that office with the company and the spotlight. I walked out with a key to a house everyone swears is past saving. Different gifts, different tests. If you've ever been assigned the small thing on purpose, you already know sometimes the small thing is the only thing that lasts. And the house on Cedar Lane, it remembers more than it shows. The floorboards talk when the wind shifts. The workshop smells like dust and cut pine, the way it did before everything. I didn't go there to cry. I went there to listen. Because somewhere in those walls, my father left something that wasn't in any envelope. And if you hold still long enough, you can hear where the truth is hiding. Dad never said, I'm proud of you like a billboard. He said it with assignments. When I was 12, he slid a flashlight into my palm and said, don't wobble. By 14, the flashlight became a ratchet. By 16, I could thread a bolt blind with gloves on. He'd nod. One short nod, and move on. Ethan got the speeches. He always did. At the company barbecue, Dad lifted a plastic cup and announced, to the future, Ethan's got the vision. Cameras were out. The interns clapped. My name got lost in the smoke from the grill. I scraped plates. I pretended the sting was just the onion in the potato salad. At home, our life ran on torque values and silence. Mom's laugh used to fill the kitchen until it didn't. After chemo, it became a whisper of a laugh, like she was saving breath for something else. Ethan came home with glossy brochures and the kind of words that make people nod without understanding. Scale, brand, disruption. I came home with clay on my boots and a notebook of sketches. Dad listened to him like a podcast. He listened to me like a weather report, useful, but background. I learned early. In this house, volume was authority. Whoever spoke loudest became right. So I learned a different trick. I made things that couldn't be argued with. A shelf that didn't sag, a hinge that didn't squeak, a beam that sat true. Quiet winds stay, loud ones fade. That became my private religion. There was a winter the pipes burst behind the laundry. It was 2 a.m. Dad stood in the cold crawl space, steam ghosting off our breath, and handed me a length of PEX. Measure twice, cut once, he said, his voice low, like a secret. Ethan came out in a robe, pinched the bridge of his nose, and asked if we could just call a guy. Dad didn't answer. He watched my hands instead. When the water stopped screaming and the joint held, his mouth tilted, half a smile, then the moment evaporated. Ethan still posted a crisis-averted selfie the next day with the caption, "Leadership is staying calm under pressure." The drywall dust in my hair didn't make the photo. That was our rhythm. I held the beam. He held the narrative. In sophomore year, I entered a regional science fair with a small truss bridge I designed from scrap. Dad drove me at dawn, thermos rattling in the cup holder. The judge pressed a thumb on the span until it bowed, and still wouldn't crack. I looked for Dad in the crowd. He was at the back, arms folded, unreadable. I won second place. On the way home, he said, "Good." Not great, not "I knew you could." Just good, like he was afraid to touch the moment in case it broke. The next week, he called Ethan onto the shop floor to introduce him to a supplier as the next boss. The bruise that left was clean, precise. No blood, all ache. I told myself I didn't need parades. I only needed blueprints. Mom got worse. Hospice came. The day before she left us, she tapped my wrist and whispered, "You fix things. Don't let that make you small." After the funeral, Dad turned the garage into a workshop again, as if sawdust could fill a silence. He stopped letting me see his eyes when I talked about grad school. "Company needs hands," he'd say. Ethan brought home a plaque from a networking dinner and leaned it where Mom's recipe book used to sit. I put the book back on top. He laughed. "You really love old stuff, huh?" I didn't answer. Some things don't need defense, they just keep working. On my 21st birthday, Dad handed Ethan the spare office key and handed me a house key with a little brass heart on the ring. "Cedar Lane," he said, "keep it from falling." At the time, it felt like a joke with a long punchline I didn't understand. Ethan popped champagne in the break room. I stayed late to finish a load test. I could say that didn't hurt. That would be a lie. What I did was simpler. I folded the hurt into something useful. Quiet drive, a sharper pencil, a steadier hand. Years later, when Mom's plants had gone brittle and the house smelled like dust and machine oil, Dad started staying late, hunched over a strange sketch, curves and angles that didn't match our usual orders. He'd cover it when Ethan walked in. He'd leave it out when I did. Sometimes I'd catch him tracing a circle with his thumb at the corner of the page, right where a tiny heart was penciled in. Heart as in shape, not sentiment. He'd murmur more to the paper than to me. "Find the heart, and the frame holds." I thought he meant brace spacing. I know better now. If you're waiting for the part where he finally looks at me and says the thing. "I see you, kid." It didn't happen. Not out loud. I got a house key and a sentence about keeping it standing. Ethan got the microphone and the spotlight. Different languages. Same father. People think favoritism is a parade. In my house, it was a glance that lasted 2 beats longer or a question I wasn't asked. You learn to read weather like a farmer. By feel, by smell, by the way the shop door sighed when he came in. And underneath all of it, that rule he never stopped repeating. Measure twice, cut once. He taught me how to make things that outlast noise. He taught Ethan how to make noise outlast silence. Only one of those lessons ages well. Only one of them survives the audit. So when Ethan laughed in that lawyer's office, I heard every rehearsal that came before it. The barbecues, the plaques, the second-place ribbon-riding shotgun. And I also heard something else, something Dad never said but kept tucking into my hands, my pockets, my toolbox. If you can hold steady in a room that tries to shake you, you don't need anyone to announce your worth. That's not a speech, that's a blueprint. And the first note on it, the one he hid in plain sight, was simple: find the heart. The next person who would say those words out loud wasn't family at all. It was a neighbor, and he would say it at a funeral, when the room smelled like lilies and old wood, and everyone forgot how to breathe. Stay, you'll hear him too. The church smelled like lilies and lemon oil, that hushy mix that makes footsteps sound guilty. Sunlight fell in clean stripes across the pews. Dust floated like slow snow. They draped the flag over Dad's casket. The blue looked darker indoors. Someone coughed. Someone shushed. You learn a lot about a family by the way it sits in silence. Ethan arrived late enough to be noticed. Sunglasses still on, like grief had a glare. He shook hands the way he always does. Palm first, smile later. Collecting condolences like business cards. A woman from the Chamber of Commerce told him, "Your father would be so proud." He said thank you, like he'd written the script. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. His cologne got there first. I took the front pew and tried to breathe around the knot under my ribs. The program had Dad's dates printed in a serif font that looked too delicate for him. 1957, 2025. 2 numbers and a dash, a whole life balanced on a hyphen. The organ swelled. People stood. Words like legacy and pillar lifted into the rafters and wobbled there. I watched a little crack in the stained glass above the pulpit and wondered how long it had been holding. How much pressure a good seam can take before it gives. After the hymn, I felt the cushion shift beside me. Mr. Alvarez sat down, hat in his lap, fingers worrying the brim like a prayer bead. Up close, he smelled like laundry soap and winter. He nodded once, the kind of nod you give someone carrying something heavy. "Your dad," he said, voice low, "never missed a morning." I nodded back. Words felt like screws you could over-tighten. We let the quiet do most of the talking. When the pastor started the eulogy, Alvarez leaned slightly. Not enough for anyone else to notice. "Cedar Lane," he murmured, eyes forward. "That place. It's got more bones than paint." I almost smiled. "I know," I whispered. He shook his head. "No, I mean the shop. The wall behind the lathe. Your dad called it the heart. Said, 'Find the heart,' and the frame holds." The words landed soft and heavy, the way a tool does when you set it down exactly where it belongs. Somewhere inside my chest, something clicked, faint, precise, like a lock testing the right key. The pastor invited people to share memories. Ethan rose on cue. He talked about leadership, vision, modernization. The crowd nodded in the right places. He used "we" a lot when he meant "I." He said, "My father taught me to think big." And the usher in the aisle wiped his eye. I watched the flag. I traced the stitching with my gaze, the way I used to trace pencil lines on Dad's blueprints, checking for drift. Big is easy to say, straight is harder to build. After, in the fellowship hall, someone put out coffee and store-bought cookies with white frosting that tasted like nothing. Strangers told me I had my mother's eyes and my father's posture. I said thank you and held the paper cup too tight. The heat bit my palm. Ethan posed between 2 ficus trees with a local reporter, tilting his chin to catch the light. "Carry the torch," the reporter said. "Already lit," Ethan answered. "Cameras like answers. They don't ask if the match is near anything that burns." Alvarez found me near the exit where the air was cooler. He glanced around, then pressed something into my hand. A small, flat washer, old steel polished by years of pockets. "Your dad kept this on him. Habit," he said. The hole in the middle was clean, the edge beveled, just so. "Why give it to me?" I asked. He looked at my hands before he looked at my face. "Because you'll know where it fits." We walked out into afternoon light that made everything too honest. The wind picked up. The flag snapped once, a dry crack that turned heads. Ethan was still inside, laughing his careful laugh, promising to honor a legacy he didn't know how to lift. I slipped the washer into my jacket and felt its weight settle, like a period at the end of a sentence. Grief doesn't shout. It calibrates, it measures twice. It listens for where the house is breathing wrong. On Cedar Lane, a wall behind a lathe had just learned how to speak, and I was finally ready to hear it. Cedar Lane looked smaller than I remembered, like the trees had grown up and decided to lean in. The porch sagged a little to the right. The paint was the color of old cloud. And the lock turned with a dry click, like clearing a throat. Inside smelled like dust, machine oil and pine, the exact mix you get when a life pauses in the middle of a sentence. I set my bag down and just listened. Houses breathe. If you've lived in enough of them, you can tell when one's holding something in. The living room carried the ghost of furniture. Pale rectangles where sun hadn't touched the floor. Mom's plants had become brown sculptures, leaves curled like they were still trying to grip light. In the kitchen, a single mug waited by the sink, rim stained with tea the color of rust. I ran the tap. It coughed, then gave up. The silence after a failed sound is louder than the sound itself. I made a list on a sticky note without thinking. Water, gas, breakers, locks. That's how my brain calms down. Tasks, not theories. The washer Mr. Alvarez gave me at the funeral sat in my jacket pocket, a steady coin of weight against my hip. I took it out and rolled its edge under my thumb. The bevel caught the light just so. A part that knows where it belongs doesn't need introduction. You just feel it. I saved the workshop for last. The way you save a truth you're not ready to say. Back when I was a kid, Dad and I used to stand in this doorway like it was a border crossing. The room hadn't changed much. Pegboard wall with hooks shaped like question marks, tools hanging where muscle memory would reach, the lathe asleep under a canvas drop cloth, the bench, scarred with rings, burns, pencil ghosts. On the far wall, his blueprints, curled, taped, some pinned with nails, like butterflies. The air had that cool, metallic taste of winter. I flipped the light. The fluorescent tubes hummed, flickered, then steadied. I breathed out. There it was. The phrase I'd been chasing since the church. Find the heart. Dad had written it in tiny block letters on the top corner of a taped-up sketch. A habit of his when he didn't want to forget the one rule that made the rest make sense. I touched the imprint and felt the indent from his pencil. Sharp and shallow. Heart. Not romantic, structural. The point where weight transfers and everything else stops pretending. I went to the lathe, pulled off the canvas. The metal was cold and clean in a way that means someone wiped it down just before walking away for the last time. Behind it, the drywall had a different skin. Paint slightly flatter, a seam not lining with the stud map in my head. Dad always marked studs with a tiny graphite dot at baseboard level, left to right, counting eights. The dots here were wrong, too far apart by a finger width. I knocked, solid. Then 6 inches over, hollow. Not very, just enough to make my skin tighten. I knocked again. Same rhythm, the way he taught me to test a joist without waking a whole room. Someone once told me women second-guess themselves more. Maybe. I don't. I count. I pulled the tape measure and sketched the wall on a scrap of cardboard, mapping studs to what I heard. The hollow ran in a vertical lane about the width of my palm, from knee height to just above shoulder. The baseboard had a hairline crack right where a shoe would never kick. The paint at that line was smoother too, as if the brush got careful, in a hurry. On the bench sat a coffee can full of screws, sorted by head and size. On top, a single brass screw with a slot that didn't match anything else in the can. Too shallow for a normal driver, too clean to be random. I held the washer next to it. Same bevel angle, same age. My throat went cold in that excited way, like standing on a ladder without looking down. Okay, I said, to no one, to him, to the room. What do you want me to see? I pulled the baseboard gently with a painter's knife. The wood gave, then resisted, then let go, with that soft pop that lives between a squeak and a sigh. Behind it, not a void, not a safe, just a sliver of dark and a rectangle of metal flush with the stud bay. No keyhole, no obvious latch, just a circular recess the size of a quarter, beveled like a washer seat. I slid the steel piece toward it and paused. I could hear my own breath. The shop hum lowered, like the tubes were leaning in too. Measure twice, I whispered, feeling a laugh rise in my chest that didn't belong to Ethan, I lined the washer's bevel to the recess and pressed. It settled without wiggle. A click barely louder than a fingernail on glass. Nothing dramatic. No panel sliding, no tiny motor whir. Just the knowledge that metal had met its home. I tried to twist. It wouldn't. I tried to pull. It held. The kind of fit you get when tolerances are personal. I stepped back, looked at the room with new eyes, like those pictures where a second image emerges if you soften your focus. The pegboard holes formed a pattern I'd never read as code. Some pegs empty, some crowded. Negative space drawing a shape I swore I'd seen on the corner of Dad's sketches. A heart. Not cutesy, more like a cam profile. The bench vise had grind marks forming a small notch at exactly the height of that recess. Line up the vise, set the peg, twist the washer. He'd built a lock that wanted more than a key. It wanted sequence. He always hated shortcuts. I dragged the bench 2 inches to the left until the vise notch kissed the imaginary line I'd drawn from the pegboard pattern. The legs complained across concrete. Dust rose. I coughed. Somewhere, a nail in the rafters pinged. I set the peg into the empty hole that would complete the cam shape. It slid in with the quiet satisfaction of a problem agreeing to be solved. My palms were damp, my hands didn't shake. You ever have a moment you know is bigger than the room you're in? When the air feels charged, like a storm you can't see yet? I put my fingers on the washer seat and counted my own heartbeat. 1, 2. I thought of Dad's thumb tracing circles on paper. The way he'd say it, half to himself, "Find the heart and the frame holds." I turned the washer, a 1/4 inch. Something inside the wall acknowledged me. Not open, not yet. Just a tiny mechanical, yesaba, the kind that travels your bones before your ears. Outside, a car passed. The window glass hummed. Inside, the shop waited, all breath, no blink. I could have forced it. I didn't. Measure twice, I remember. There was a second move here, one he'd want me to earn. I stepped back, wiped my hands on my jeans, and looked at the pegboard one more time. The pattern under the fluorescent light hardened into meaning. I smiled, small and real. The heart wasn't hiding, it was teaching me to look. Tomorrow I'd bring the right driver, the right light, and the patience he built into my hands. Tonight I took the washer back out, felt the print it left on my skin, and said out loud to the empty room, "I hear you." And from the wall behind the lathe, something answered with the softest tick. Not a clock, a mechanism. Waking up, find the heart. I was closer than a breath. By the time the first news article hit, my coffee was still warm. The headline read, "Ethan Miller takes the helm, a new era for Miller Engineering." His photo sat right under it. Hand on a conference table, suit crisp, jaw angled for respect. He looked like a man born for spotlights, or at least someone who believed he was. I scrolled past 3 paragraphs of buzzwords: innovation, legacy, modernization. It was the same sermon he'd been rehearsing since Dad's last hospital stay. There was a quote from him, too. "My father taught me that leadership isn't inherited, it's earned." I nearly choked on my coffee. Outside, Portland rain ticked against the window, slow and steady, the kind of rain that tells the truth. Everything beautiful here that eventually rusts. My phone buzzed. Ethan. Grace. His voice had that game show host energy he turns on for donors. "You see the article? We made front page of the Business Journal." I stared at the screen, thumb hovering, thinking about how my version of "we" involved patched pipes and an oil-stained garage. "Yeah," I said, "I saw it." He laughed, always too loud for the distance between us. "Not bad, huh? Dad's old place is going digital. New contracts, new machines. We're even partnering with some robotics startups. Big moves, Grace. Big ones." "Sounds expensive," I said. He didn't hear the weight under it. He never does. "Investment," he corrected. "You gotta spend money to make money. Anyway, you should come down to the office. Maybe we'll get you doing a promo shot. family legacy vibes. I don't think the world needs another photo of your tie, I said. He missed the joke entirely. He started listing milestones: leases signed, employees hired, a press event next week. He even mentioned a limited edition commemorative wrench engraved with what Miller Generation 2. I could almost hear him smiling through the line. "You'll get one, of course," he said. "Souvenir." Souvenir. Like everything I touched was already past tense. When he finally hung up, I stayed by the window and watched the reflection of the old house behind me. Ceiling cracked, wiring humming faintly. Still standing, still real. I pulled Dad's blueprint folder from my bag. The corner of one page curled up, revealing a small pencil heart. Faint, but certain. I thought about Ethan's glossy photo, about his perfectly lit handshake, and I thought about the phrase Dad used to repeat when something didn't line up. Looks right isn't the same as is right. A week later, I saw Ethan again, on TV this time, shaking hands with investors at a conference, saying words like sustainability and AI-driven automation as if they were charms against doubt. Behind the podium, the company's new logo glowed bright blue, modern, hollow. I turned down the volume. In the quiet, I could hear the workshop whispering behind me, faint as a breath through the walls. The washer sat on the bench, catching a sliver of light like an eye half open. Ethan had the noise, I had the silence. And for the first time, I started to understand which one held more power. Because silence isn't weakness. It's a room before the storm. And mine was starting to hum. I went back the next evening with a headlamp, a stubby flathead I'd ground to a thinner lip, and the kind of patience you only learn fixing things that were never made for your hands. The shop felt different in the dark, quieter, like a held breath. Fluorescents hummed low, rain ticked on the eaves. I lined the bench where I'd left it, checked the pegboard pattern again, those empty holes sketching a cam-shaped heart, and slid the last peg into place. It clicked with that private, satisfying sound that doesn't need an audience. "Okay," I said, palms dry now. "Sequence." I set the vise to kiss the chalk line I'd drawn the night before, pressed the washer into its beveled seat, then gave it a quarter turn. A faint yes moved through the wall, more sensation than sound, so I kept going. Peg washer, vice handle 90 degrees and then back a hair. Dad hated brute force. He liked tolerances that behaved when you respected them. On the third turn, something behind the drywall unlatched. A shallow thud, like a tool lying down after a long shift. The baseboard panel loosened at the seam I'd traced with my fingernail. I eased it forward. No drama, no spy movie hiss. Just the clean, dry slide of a secret finally tired of being one. Inside the cavity sat a capped aluminum tube the length of my forearm, strapped between studs with two leather bands gone soft with age. Beside it, a flat envelope and a small brass key dangling on a thin wire hook. The key's tag was blank, except for a hand-stamped number, 312. My throat did that cold-hot thing again. I took the envelope first. Dad's block letters. Grace. The ink had feathered at the edges where oil from his hands must have touched it. Tiny suns blooming on each letter. I didn't sit. I opened it standing up, because some words don't want chairs. If you're reading this, kid, you didn't quit. His voice lived in the paper like a low current. There are two ways to build, loud and fast, or true and patient. I failed at saying things out loud when your mother got sick. I won't fail at leaving what matters in a way you can hold. I swallowed. The heater kicked once and died. I kept reading. Ethan needed noise. I gave him a room. That answers noise. You needed a problem. I gave you a house that answers patience. This isn't a consolation prize. It's a blueprint with your name on it. There was a line under that, penciled later, lighter than the rest. Find the heart and the frame holds. The letter shifted from apology to instruction. like a gear catching. The tube holds the last working set of drawings for the thing I couldn't finish, what I called the heart engine. It's not sentimental. It's a geometry problem that listens when the world tries to shake apart. If you can bring it from sketch to steel, you'll understand why I couldn't leave it in the shop where anyone could guess and sell it before the math was right. I glanced at the tube. My fingers itched. The key isn't for this wall, it's for the rest of it. You'll know where to take it when you ask the right person the right question. He lives 2 doors down and has never lost a serial number in his life. Mr. Alvarez, of course. I asked Mrs. Porter to keep her mouth shut about this. She knows the part she needs to know, not the whole machine. I've set the paperwork so the thing that belongs to you stays yours until you can carry it. If you never open the tube, you still have a house. If you do, you won't just have a roof. You'll have language, the kind you think in. My eyes blurred. I blinked until the words came back into focus. Measure twice, cut once, don't rush the torque. And when Ethan laughs, let him. Laughter loses air if you don't pump it for him. No, I'm proud of you. No parade. But in Dad speak, that was a standing ovation. I set the letter down on the bench like it could bruise. Then I unstrapped the aluminum tube. The cap resisted, then surrendered with a dry sigh. Inside, tissue paper, brittle as leaves, and a roll of vellum that smelled like pencil, coffee, and a little like winter. I slid the roll out and loosened the band. The first sheet was a title block in that tidy hand I'd watched for years. Heart engine, Rev 7B. Below it, resonant stabilization, cam counter phase dampers, load transfer lattice, modular. Sketched across the vellum was a cam profile shaped like a heart only an engineer would love. No romance, all radius logic. The notes in the margin were the real conversation. Micro numbers, question marks, the kind of tiny arrows only the writer understands. Every few inches, that pencil heart appeared again. Always in the corner, always a little different. Like he'd been tracing it while thinking. I laid the second sheet over the first. A lattice exploded in isometric view. Triangles nested into hexagons, a pattern built to swallow vibration and spit out stillness. My hands hovered, wanting to trace but not daring to smudge. I could hear his voice in the white space. Looks right isn't the same as is right. There was a smaller envelope tucked between pages. Inside it, a 16-gigabyte thumb drive labeled in Dad's careful caps. Sims and BOM. Simulations and a bill of materials. Of course, he digitized the parts he didn't trust a wall to protect. Of course. He'd still keep paper. Redundancy wasn't paranoia, it was love, in our language. I put the sheets back in order and capped the tube like I was putting a child to sleep. The brass key warmed in my palm. No bank name, no address. Just a number and a direction. Ask the man who remembers cereals and storms. My phone buzzed then. Unknown number, then a voicemail notification. I didn't listen. The shop had better messages. Rain softened. The fluorescents flickered once, as if they were agreeing with me. I slid the washer out of its seat and pressed the baseboard back into place until the seam disappeared. If you looked too fast, you'd never know a wall had told the truth. I wiped the bench, tucked the letter into a plastic sleeve, and zipped the tube into my bag. At the door, I turned off the light and let the dark have the room again. The house settled. Wood talking to nails, air adjusting to the shift. I stood there with the key and the number and the shape of a future I could actually hold. If you've ever been handed the small thing and told to be grateful, you'll understand the feeling. It doesn't feel small when it's yours. It feels exact. It feels like a tool that finally fits your hand. Tomorrow I'd knock on Mr. Alvarez's door and ask the right question. Tonight I pressed the key into my palm until it left a half-moon mark and whispered to the quiet shop, I found the heart. From somewhere behind the lathe, The mechanism answered with that soft, private tick. Not applause. A cue, curtain up. Mr. Alvarez's porch light was still on when I walked up. A weak yellow halo fighting the rain. He opened the door before I knocked twice, like he'd been expecting the rhythm. The air that came out smelled like sawdust and peppermint tea. "You found it," he said, not as a question. I held up the brass key. "Box 312, I said. He smiled the way people do when a story's about to start. "Your dad told me if you ever showed up with that number, I should drive you downtown." "Didn't say what for, said you'd ask right." We rode in his truck, heater whining. Portland lights smeared against wet windows. I wanted to ask 100 questions, but he hummed softly to an old Spanish song on the radio, and the quiet between verses did more talking than we did. At First Cascade Bank, the lobby was empty except for a janitor and the night security guard scrolling his phone. Alvarez walked straight to the counter, nodded to the clerk. "Evening, Lila. We need box 312. The clerk blinked, checked the list, and her eyebrows lifted slightly before she disappeared through the vault door. He leaned close. "You know, your father didn't keep much faith in paper promises. Said metal and math tell fewer lies." "I'm starting to believe that," I said. She returned with a small rectangular box, scuffed at the corners. The brass tag read, 312. My palms itched. Alvarez gestured to a private booth. Inside the booth, the light buzzed low and yellow. The box sat between us like a confession. The lock turned easy, no drama, just smooth precision. A man's final proof that he measured twice. Inside, a leather-bound folder, a flash drive, and another envelope marked G. Miller. The folder held stock certificates, bond records, and something stranger, documents for a trust labeled Miller Heart Project. On the second page, the beneficiary line read my full name. The value column made my breath stall. 3.8 million. My hands went cold first, then hot, then steady. "Your dad started that fund 15 years ago," Alvarez said softly. "Every time he sold a contract, a piece went here. Said it was for R&D, but I always suspected he meant you." I opened the envelope. Inside, a shorter letter in that same square handwriting. "Grace, if you're reading this, it means the wall listened. What's in this box is every dollar I saved from not modernizing too soon, from not buying the things people said I should. Ethan got the noise. You get the signal. The account isn't charity, it's continuity. Keep building, kid. There's work to finish." My vision blurred. Alvarez slid a handkerchief across the table without looking at me. "You know," he said, "the last day I saw him, he brought coffee, black, and told me he was proud of you. Didn't use the word prouds, of course. Said, 'She measures before she cuts. She'll outlast us all.'" "That's how Walter said love." I laughed, choked, wiped my eyes. "Yeah," I whispered, "that sounds like him." We drove back in silence. The city was a soft glow behind rain. The key sat heavy in my palm, its work done. I watched the streetlights blur past and thought of Ethan's gleaming press photos. The empire he was so sure he'd earned. Dad hadn't left me scraps. He'd left me the blueprint for stillness, for patience, for the kind of wealth that doesn't rust. When Alvarez pulled into my driveway, he killed the engine and said, "You know, Grace, most people inherit things to spend. You inherited something to keep." I nodded, fingers tight around the folder. "No," I said quietly. "Something to finish." The house lights blinked once as I stepped out, as if they'd been waiting for me. Inside, the shop smelled like warm metal and rain. I laid the folder on the bench, pressed my palm over it, and whispered to the walls, "He was right. The heart holds." And for the first time since the funeral, I swore I heard it answer. Steady, alive, like an engine catching its rhythm. I didn't sleep. I lined the documents across the dining table, trust papers, stock records, the flash drive, like a bridge I had to stress test before crossing. The house was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator click from cool to cooler. Rain traded places with wind. I opened the shorter letter again and read it slow, the way you read instructions when there's only one cut and no extra material. Grace, if the wall listened, it means you did too. Here's the part nobody got to hear me say out loud. Ethan believes leadership is noise. I made the will sound like noise to see how far he'd follow it. You and I speak structure, so I left you structure. I breathed through it, counting. The Miller Heart Project is a grant with a lock on it. Not a carrot, not a bribe, a brace. It releases in phases tied to work, not headlines. Mrs. Porter knows the framework. She does not know the drawings. She will hate that, and she will be right to. Tell her the truth she needs, not the one that puts you on a magazine cover. I flipped to the trust schedule. It wasn't a blank check. Of course it wasn't. Tranches, milestones, words like provisional release and patent filing trigger. Each line matched a phase in the vellum set. Rev 7B, Rev 8, a final rev, with no number yet. He'd built a staircase and dared me to climb it without skipping. Phase 1, Rev 7B, design consolidation, simulation tolerances under 2% variance, release 15%. Phase 2, Rev 8, functional prototype, load transfer lattice passes 3x nominal, release 25%. Phase 3, final rev, patent submission plus independent validation, release remaining balance. I pressed my thumb to the page where his had pressed. A faint grease crescent I could almost fit. There were names. A trustee I recognized from Dad's quiet coffee meetings, an engineering professor at OSU listed as independent validator, Mrs. Porter as counsel of record. It was airtight and personal. The math of love. You don't owe Ethan an argument. You owe yourself the work. If he calls, let the phone ring. If he laughs, don't pump the air for him. I know you know this, but write it down anyway. Looks right isn't the same as is right. The shop taught us that. So did your mother. The word mother made my throat pinch. I took a sip of water that tasted like copper in old pipes. If you never touch this, the house is still yours. It will keep you if you keep it. If you do touch it, remember the point of the thing. It listens when the world shakes. Build that into everything. Your team, your books, your sleep. Don't let anyone rush the torque. There was one last paragraph, lighter, like he'd leaned back and spoken softer to the paper. I did not give Ethan a test to fail, I gave him a mirror. Maybe he finds his way yet. It won't be because you held him up. That's not your job. Your job is the beam that holds when the wind finds the seam. I set the letter down and stared at the ceiling until the paint lines blurred into one pale sheet. Somewhere in the house, wood settled like a breath, leaving a tired body. I pulled the flash drive cap and slid it into my laptop. The screen blinked. Folders nested into folders, named the way Dad named everything when he wanted to be unambiguous. SIMS, Rev 7B, Lattice Iterations, Bomb Master. Each simulation file began with a note. Assume insult, design for it. I smiled. That was his way of saying, life will push. Build for the push. Halfway through the bill of materials, my phone buzzed. That voicemail from earlier. The unknown number. I pressed play, expecting a telemarketer. Ethan's voice filled the room. Thinner when recorded, a little breathless. Hey, sis. Big week. Thought you should know we signed a lease for the new digital line. State of the art. Expensive, but you gotta spend money to make money, right? Investors love it. You should come by. We're doing a video for the site. Family, story, legacy, all that. Anyway, hope the house is holding. A pause. You don't have to be stubborn about it, you know. There's always room here if you're ready to think bigger. I let the silence after the message sit there like a puddle of something you don't want on your shoe. Then I saved the audio file into a folder labeled Noise. It felt mean. It also felt accurate. Back to the papers. The trust had a page called Eventualities. What happens if I'm hit by a bus? What happens if the heart engine never earns its name? What happens if the company tries to claim it? A clause jumped out. In the event of bankruptcy proceedings at Miller Engineering, all IP related to Heart Engine remains separate and protected. Dad had thought it through. He wasn't hiding money. He was hiding time and giving it to me in pieces I could carry. I printed 2 copies of the milestone schedule and taped one inside the workshop cabinet door. Right next to Mom's measuring cups I refused to throw away. Phase 1. Wasn't glory. It was spreadsheets and tolerances, nights of simulation runs, a small team that could think in triangles and silence. I pictured the faces of the 3 senior techs Ethan had let go in his first month. The ones who knew every old machine by its cough. You don't build a lattice alone. You recruit people who keep houses standing. Or the night deepened. The fridge clicked again. I texted Mrs. Porter. Need to discuss trust mechanics. Tomorrow morning? 3 dots then. 9 a.m. My office. Bring coffee. I'll bring questions. I could hear the subtext even in the bubbles. She liked rules. Dad had given her enough to obey. I was about to give her the math to respect. On my way to brush my teeth, I stopped at the workshop and pressed my palm to the wall behind the lathe. The mechanism inside didn't move. It didn't have to. The real movement was here, in the paperwork and the path it drew. People online would call this a twist. In a shop, we call it a reveal. Pulling the drop cloth off a thing that was always there. I wrote 3 lines on a sticky note and stuck it to the tube. Assume insult. Design for it. Find the heart and the frame holds. Don't pump the air for the laugh. Then I wrote a 4th one I hadn't expected to. It arrived in my hand like muscle memory. Build the thing. Don't build the story. I slid the trust folder back into its sleeve. I thought of Ethan's engraved wrenches and the press event and the way cameras love a bright blue logo. Cameras love stories. Structures love checks. I know which one pays invoices. Around 2, the rain stopped. The house changed key, lighter, curious. I opened a window and let the cold in until my cheeks stung. Somewhere down the block, a garbage truck hissed. Somewhere in my pocket, the key to box 3112 warmed against my thigh like a coin taking sides. Arid. Here's the truth I wish I could put on a billboard for anyone who's ever been handed the small thing. It only looks small from far away. Up close, it's exact. It's a catch in a mechanism that keeps the whole machine from shaking itself apart. That's what Dad left me. Not a stash, not a secret to make a point. A job. By dawn, I had a list. Call Mrs. Porter. Draft a non-disclosure invite to the 3 techs. Email the OSU professor listed as validator. Map Rev 7B tasks into sprints. And at the bottom, circle twice. Tell Ethan nothing. Not because I wanted him to fail, because the heart engine wasn't built to perform for his camera. It was built to hold when the wind found the seam. I turned off the lights and the house exhaled, boards relaxing, pipes settling. From the workshop, a memory rose. Dad's voice low over the din, the one he saved for hard moments. Measure twice, kid, then cut once, and if anyone laughs while you measure, let them. They'll run out of breath before you run out of line. The laugh still echoed in my head. It sounded smaller now. The blueprint sounded bigger. The frame was starting to hold. The first sign wasn't a headline. It was a sound. My phone vibrating across the kitchen counter at 11:08 p.m., jittering against the ceramic like a trapped bug. Ethan. I let it buzz to voicemail. It rang again and again. On the fourth call, I answered. His voice came in too bright, like someone talking with a smile that won't sit still. Hey, sis, you up? Crazy day. We're rebalancing. Corporate for we're bleeding. I pulled the fridge open, letting the cold spill on my face. Rebalancing what? Head count, legacy roles, trimming fat. Paper shuffled on his end. A door creaked. He lowered his voice. Also, temporary cash squeeze. Payroll timing, nothing big. How much is nothing? A pause. Long enough for me to hear him breathe. 50, maybe 75, just for a week. I set the orange juice down too hard. The carton thumped. $50,000 for a week? Grace. He softened my name, the way he does when he wants me to forget the edge. You have the house. You could do a HELOC overnight. I'd pay you back plus interest. You'll barely feel it. My eyes went to the workshop door. The wall behind the lathe sat there like a shut mouth. I kept my voice flat. No. Silence. Then the laugh, smaller now, thinner. Come on, don't be petty. Dad would want us to help each other. There it was, the family card. Heat rose behind my ribs. Dad wanted us to measure before we cut. How many people did you lay off today? They were misaligned. He exhaled, annoyed. Look, negotiations take time. Investors get spooked by headcount. I had to signal discipline. You fired the people who know where the bodies are buried. I closed the fridge. The kitchen light made a hard circle on the floor. I stepped out of it. You need them to find leaks before you flood. He didn't answer that. Grace, I'm not asking for a kidney. It's bridge money. Be smart. I am being smart. A beat. Then the turn. Darvo in a pressed suit. You've always resented me, you know that? I offer to bring you into the company, put your face on the site, and you act like I'm the enemy. This is why Dad put me in charge. I let him talk. Words have a way of exposing themselves when you don't wrestle them. He filled the space with phrases he thinks sound like leadership. Runway, synergy, upside. Underneath it, I could hear a fluorescent light buzzing somewhere. Cheap, tired, miswired. Ethan, I said finally. No. He sucked his teeth. Unbelievable. You get the house and suddenly you think you're what? Better than me? That place is a money pit. This is a company. Cash in, cash out. Everyone understands that, but you. Everyone. Well, not the bank this week, he said, trying to laugh. It's snagged. It's timing. How many clients did you lose? 2, he admitted, then coughed. They'll be back. Transition jitters. Also, minor compliance thing. City's on about a permit for the new line. It's nothing. Paperwork. I could hear papers rifling, a pen clicking. A door closed somewhere. His voice got echoey. Bathroom echoey. Hiding. Look, I don't have time to explain cap tables to you. Just say you'll help. I'll wire you back in 10 days. 7 even. He died. You want me to borrow against my roof so you can float a mistake you won't even name? It's not a mistake, it's strategy. Then let your investors fund it. They're cautious, he said. The word landed crooked. Grace, come on, be a team player for once. There it was again. We when he meant me. I could have told him about the trust, about the heart engine, about structure, not story. I didn't, because none of that was a life raft for the kind of leak he'd drilled himself. I'm not your line of credit, I said. He went quiet, long enough for me to hear a faucet drip. Then he tried another angle, softer. You're my sister. I am, and I'm saying no. He exhaled a laugh that had no humor in it. You'll regret this. When I take this company public, you'll wish you'd been nicer. When you learn what a balance sheet is, call me. I hung up. The air in the kitchen felt heavier, like the room had been holding its breath while I spoke. I stood there, palms flat on the counter, and let the adrenaline flatten. Across the room, the blueprint tube leaned against the wall, its label neat and patient. On the sticky note I'd written earlier, the lines glowed soft in the under-cabinet light. The Zoom insult. Design for it. Find the heart. Don't pump the air for the laugh. I added a fourth. Don't fund chaos. 2 days later, the first actual headline landed. Miller Engineering faces environmental complaint over new digital line. The article was short and careful, the way papers are when lawyers are watching. Words like alleged permit irregularities, community concerns. A photo showed a chain-link fence with a yellow notice tacked to it. Ethan, in the same suit from the profile, stood just out of frame. Cameras always almost catch the truth. My phone rang again that night. He didn't bother with the bright voice. Okay, he said, breath tight. 200. I'll sign whatever. We had a client push a payment. It's locked up in some procurement portal. It's not my fault. There it was again. Not my fault. My jaw ached. You need a CFO, Ethan, not a photographer. Stop being clever, he snapped. This is family. Family is not a business plan. He tried the soft voice again, lower now, frayed. Grace, please. I closed my eyes. For a split second, I saw us as kids. Him taller, me with scraped knees, both of us holding one end of a 2x4 while Dad measured. I wanted to be kind. I also wanted to be honest. I won't give you money, I said, careful with each word. But I'll give you advice. Sit down with the 3 people you fired. Apologize. Bring them back. Pause the new line. Fix your permits. Stop buying announcements. He didn't answer, the kind of silence that isn't empty, just crowded with pride. When he spoke, each word had been sanded to a fine edge. Keep your house, Grace. I plan to. The line clicked dead. Door! I put the phone on the counter like it might bite. Outside, rain stitched the dark together. Inside, the workshop hummed in that low approval way I swear I didn't imagine. I opened the laptop, pulled up the Rev 7B sims, and set a new batch to run. Blue bars crept across the screen, steady as a heartbeat. Work is a better sedative than whiskey. A week later, the rumor hit my inbox before the news did. Miller Engineering missed payroll. An old tech forwarded me a screenshot of a group chat. Anyone getting paid? HR says Monday, rent's due Friday. I stared at the messages until the words blurred. Then I closed the window and wrote down the only thing I could control. Prototype lattice segment test, Saturday, 9 a.m. When Ethan called again, I let it go to voicemail. He didn't leave a message. The next morning, a process server showed up at his office with a notice from the city. The photo made the rounds. Ethan looking off camera, mouth half open, as if someone had moved the spotlight without warning. I didn't gloat. I measured. I cut. I tightened the bolts on the rig until the wrench sang. A clean, small note that didn't need an audience. The house settled behind me, wood agreeing with wood. Somewhere in the wall, a mechanism held its breath. If you've ever been tempted to rescue the person who laughed at you, don't. Let the laugh run out of air. Let the frame you're building answer louder. Tomorrow I'd meet Mrs. Porter at 9 a.m. with coffee and the trust schedule. Tonight I had a lattice to test and a quiet that didn't feel empty anymore. It felt loaded, like a room right before someone flips the breaker. And when it flips, you'll see who actually knows how to keep the lights on. Mrs. Porter's office smelled like paper and peppermint. She'd already printed the trust schedule and highlighted it like a battlefield map. "You weren't kidding," she said, tapping Phase 2. "Prototype, independent validation, patent filing triggers. Clean." Her eyes flicked up. "And separate from Miller Engineering in the event of whatever they're doing over there." "In the event of noise," I said. She allowed herself half a smile. "Then let's keep you in Signal." We notarized 3 forms. She slid me a folder thick with next steps. "I'll deal with trustees. You deal with steel." By Saturday, the prototype lattice sat on the rig in my workshop. Triangles nested into hexagons, the geometry of stubborn hope. The 3 senior techs Ethan had cut showed up at dawn, coffee in hand, faces I'd known since high school. I said the words I wish he'd said. "I'm sorry you were pushed out." They shrugged the way people do when humility is rare and they don't quite know what to do with it. We got to work. We loaded the lattice 3 times nominal. The rig groaned, then settled. The accelerometer line on my laptop flattened, smooth as a held breath. "It wants more," one of them said. We gave it more. Stillness held. When the line stayed flat through the 3rd cycle, I felt something unclench in my chest that I didn't know I'd been carrying since the will reading. I didn't cheer. I printed the plots. We took photos with gloved hands in the frame, no faces, just proof. I emailed the OSU validator with the data, then opened the trust schedule and drew a neat check mark next to our Phase 2M. Quiet wins stay. The call came that afternoon. Not Ethan, his operations manager, voice tight. "He asked me to call you. We missed payroll again. Half the floor walked. The city shut down the new line until permits clear. Investors want a plan. She swallowed. "He's asking if you'll come to the office just to talk, off the record." I looked at the lattice, at the plots, at the washer sleeping on the bench. "I'll come," I said, surprising myself. "But not to fix paperwork." The office felt smaller without people. The lobby plants had given up pretending. In the conference room, Ethan stood with his hands on the back of a chair, sleeves rolled, jaw tight. He looked like a man who finally understood that spotlights don't heat a room. "You came," he said, as if that proved something. "I came to tell you what no one else will," I said, setting my folder on the table. He glanced at it like it might bite. "If this is another lecture on permits..." "It's not." I inhaled. "You fired the people who could save you. You bought machines you don't understand. You called it leadership because it was loud. It's not. Leadership is torque, applied in the right place at the right time so the whole thing doesn't shear." His mouth tightened. "You always were poetic when you were jealous." I opened the folder and slid the plots across to him. The silence in the room grew teeth. "That's what stillness looks like under 3x load," I said. "That's what work looks like when it's not trying to be photographed." He scanned the graph without seeing it. "What am I looking at?" "A future you can't buy," I said, "and a past you can stop ruining." "Sumo." He laughed then, reflex, defensive, empty. It died halfway through. "So what? You want to sell me your little science project? Make me look like the bad guy who needs his kid's sister's homework?" "No," I said. "I'm not selling you anything." "Then why are you here?" "Because a mirror is crueler when it's silent. Because I'd promised myself I wouldn't fund chaos, but I would tell the truth." "Dad didn't give you the company to watch you drown," I said softly. "He gave you a chance to learn what he never said out loud. You don't listen to people, to permits, to math. You perform, and when the performance breaks, you ask for loans." And he paled. "Did you come here to gloat?" "If I wanted to gloat, I'd bring a camera," I said. "I brought data." I tapped the graph. I'm filing a patent. I have a validator. I have funding that releases on milestones. I have a team you let go. You wanted a photo. I wanted a frame that holds. We got what we wanted. For a second, the old swagger fought to stand back up. Then, it didn't. He sat down. The chair creaked. He put his hands flat on the table, the way Dad used to when he was pinning a blueprint in place. "What do I do?" he asked, voice not much above a whisper. It would have been so easy to end him with a line, to say, "Drown." Learn to swim. But the truth does better than revenge. It lasts. "You apologize," I said. "You call the people who know things and you say the sentence you've never said, 'I was wrong.' You step back from the new line. You pay the fines. You sell the machines you can't keep. And you stop buying announcements." He stared at the graph like it might translate itself. "Will you?" He swallowed. "Can you?" No, I kept my voice steady. "I won't lend you money. I won't merge anything. I won't let you launder noise through my quiet." His eyes flicked to the folder again. "Dad helped you, didn't he?" Not a question, a revelation. "Dad left me a job," I said. "Same as he left you. Different job, same lesson." Something in his face crumpled then. Not theatrically, not for an audience. Just a man whose story had run out of stage. He pressed his fingers to his eyes and took one long breath that sounded like giving up and beginning at the same time. "Okay," he said. "Okay." When I stood, he stood too. And for a moment, we looked like what the world kept trying to photograph. The heirs, the legacy, the continuity. Then the illusion flickered, and it was just two kids in a shop again, one of us holding the board while the other one finally measured. As I reached the door, he said, "Grace?" I turned. He looked smaller in the big room. "I shouldn't have laughed," he said. "I know, yeah," I said and left it there. Forgiveness isn't a press release, it's a boundary. Outside, the city felt newly washed. Clouds thinned, light honest. My phone buzzed. A reply from the OSU validator. "Data received. Preliminary review looks promising. Let's schedule independent test." Then another email. "Energy Innovation Fund, invitation to pitch." I stood on the sidewalk and let the wind find my face. Not victory. Verification. The difference matters. Back at Cedar Lane, the workshop waited with its faithful hum. We ran the test again, this time on camera. Hands, gauges, numbers. No faces. I sent the file to Mrs. Porter. She called within the hour. "Phase 2 triggered," she said. Paper moved, not headlines. Money that belonged to work found its way to the work. We hired the techs back on contract with options. We ordered parts in quantities that wouldn't drown us. We booked the validator for Tuesday. We drafted the provisional patent language and used short, honest sentences. We built a thing worth holding. That night, the house settled around me. Old bones and new math-finding agreement. I made tea in Mom's chipped mug and stood in the doorway to the shop, watching the prototype sit there like a heartbeat that had learned a new rhythm. I thought about the way Ethan had looked at the graph, confused and a little cracked open. I hoped he would call the people who knew things. I hoped he would up-measure before he cut. On my way upstairs, I pressed my palm to the wall behind the lathe. The mechanism didn't move. It didn't need to. The secret had done its job. It taught me where to listen. The rest was just work. If you're waiting for a trumpet, you won't like this part. Justice doesn't blast. It calibrates. It lines up holes on a pegboard and asks you to find the sequence. It sounds like a washer turning a quarter inch and something inside a wall saying yes. Brief pause. The next morning, the papers ran 2 stories, side by side, Miller Engineering. Pauses expansion amid permit review, and local engineer files provisional patent for novel vibration lattice. No photos of me, just diagrams, just lines. That held. And somewhere in a conference room with dead ficus trees, my brother learned how to make a phone call with the words, "I was wrong at the start. That's not revenge, that's repair." And it was never mine to perform for him. Mine was to build the beam, and now it was holding. Tone shifts to calm, forward-looking. 2 months later, the house no longer sighed when I walked in. It breathed. Fresh paint softened the edges of old walls. The workshop smelled of steel and cedar instead of mildew. The prototype stood by the window like a sculpture of patience. We called it the heart engine now. Not for branding, for accuracy. It listened. The validator's report came back clean. No red flags, no math errors. Just one line that said, "Model demonstrates unique resonance stability under asymmetric load." Translation: it worked. Phase 3 of the trust triggered automatically. Mrs. Porter sent the email at dawn. Full release confirmed. Funds transferred. She added a line I didn't expect. "Your father was right about you." I stared at it a long time before replying. He was right about the math. Pause. Shift to grounded pride. Money didn't feel like victory. It felt like ballast. Weight to keep things steady. I paid off the mortgage. Bought new lathes. Set up an LLC under my own name. No ribbon cutting. No press, just paperwork, quiet and clean. I called the company Cedar Works because I like the sound of wood that doesn't warp. Beat, subtle tone shift. Ethan called once, just once, midday, midweek. "Hey," he said. "Hey, I took a job, sales director. Smaller firm. Feels weird to have a boss." "You were right," he added. "About a lot." It wasn't an apology. It was an echo. But echoes are how sound checks if the room still has shape. Soft smile in voice. "I'm glad," I said. "You'll like working for someone who listens." He chuckled. "Guess Dad tested the wrong kid." "No," I said. "He tested both. Only one of us read the instructions." He didn't argue. "If you ever need anything—" "I know," I said. And I meant it. Because there was nothing left to win or lose. Just distance, that didn't hurt. Cue warm ending tone. That weekend, I brought white roses to Riverside Cemetery, Mom's favorite. I sat under the oak and started talking the way people talk when no one interrupts. "Hey, Dad, we did it. The design held. Phase 3 cleared. The lattice doesn't flinch under asymmetric load. Ethan's learning. Slower than me, but learning." The wind moved through the branches. That low whisper he always called nature's lathe hum. "I figured it out," I said. "It wasn't about inheritance. It was about calibration. You didn't split us by money. You split us by lesson." Ethan needed the world to echo back. I needed to build something that could stand without noise. I unfolded the validator's report and placed it on the stone. Top line, resonant stabilization. Lattice, approved for patent filing. "See you, Chief." Beat, peaceful, quiet pride. Back home, the workshop was still. I ran my hand along the prototype's frame. Cool, smooth, alive in the way only honest work is. I turned off the lights. The heart engine glowed. Just a hum pulsing through the lattice. Steady, patient, alive. People always ask what peace feels like after a war that was never declared. It feels like this. Not triumphant, not cinematic, just level. Like the world has finally stopped tilting beneath your feet. Before heading upstairs, I tacked one last note to the wall. Find the heart and the frame holds. Measure twice. Cut once. Let silence do the talking. Then I shut the door, and the mechanism inside the wall gave a small, perfect click. Metal on metal. Tolerance exact. Not magic, not mystery, just proof that everything, when aligned right, listens back. Long final pause. Quieter delivery. The laugh that started it all was long gone now, but its echo, it built something better. A rhythm, a heartbeat, a home. That was the real inheritance. Not the money, not the machine, just the quiet that stays standing when everything loud has fallen away. And as the night settled, the heart engine hummed once. Steady, patient, alive. A lullaby made of math, memory, and grace.